capitalism, all of the gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method of farming.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do passive design.
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that a bigger number? Or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know, Zach.
It's a tough one. I
It's
know.
really hard.
And maybe comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong suit. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. Tonight we are going to continue on in our audiobook listen through of Alexander Berkman's What is Communist Anarchism? And tonight we're discussing chapters on what is anarchy possible, and let's see what the next one after that. Probably won't get all the way through the next one after it because it's a longer one, but it's Will Anarchist Communism Work? So some pretty, nuts and bolts sort of stuff happening tonight. Salt and Prepper, any anarchist groups in Ukraine fighting right now? I don't actually know about that. I haven't checked in as much as I should have been with particular anarchist movements within Ukraine. Ukraine does have quite a long history and tradition with anarchism. It's where Nestor Makhno raised his Black Army, which was instrumental in defeating the White Army and winning the revolution for the Bolsheviks. So there's quite a tradition of anarchism in Ukraine. I don't know how much that has carried through to the present. I know it is. I know there's somewhat of a legacy still continuing on, but I'm not super familiar with it, so it's hard to say. But if you know of anything, I would certainly love to pass that information on. All right. Before we start, just wanted to point out on the screen there, on Facebook, we are creating a live stream and video creator collective. I'm one of four channels that all stream to the Facebook page, Left Signal Boost TV. So if you go to Facebook and check out that page, you can get notified when any of us go live. You can join yourself if you are a content creator, a leftist content creator. Pretty simple procedure. Just submit a link to your work, and if we decide to take you on, which so far has been everyone who has submitted, we will give you access to stream from the page as well. And it's just a way for leftist content creators to kind of share audience, share resources, and work on building up each other in the process of putting out the content we would be anyway. Okay, so I think we should probably get right into the chapter. So again, we're going to start with, oh, let me make sure that I have the closed captioning turned on. So yeah, we're going to start with the chapter on Is Anarchy Possible? So a lot of people view anarchy, even today, as kind of a pipe dream, like a fun thing to think about, but something that's not really possible within our lifetimes, at least not on a broad scale. And you'll usually hear from like Marxist Leninists that you have to go through a period of socialism before we can ever get to communism, which is pretty much the same sort of goal as anarchism. It's a classless, moneyless, stateless society. It's just a matter of how you get there and how quickly you get there in the eyes of Marxist Leninists. So they will tell you that you have to go through a period of socialism first. I don't know that they're entirely wrong about that. It definitely seems that the countries that have gone through longer periods of capitalism and switched to socialism have, fared better, and also the movements more broadly, than the ones that went in a period of just a couple years, as say Russia did. It went from uh, a monarchist state to a more or less liberal democracy for only about a year, not even quite a whole year, and then went straight for socialism. So it was a very fast change, and it lasted many decades, but eventually fell apart again. So there may be something to be said for going through a period of, you know, these various stages of economic liberation. Definitely capitalism is preferable to monarchism. That should probably go without saying, but I guess not everyone just intuits that. But a lot better to at least be able to choose your master than to have your entire life planned out for you, and everything based on just the lottery of birth. But socialism is, of course, better yet. So it very well may be that you do have to, at the societal level anyway, go through a period of socialism first before people are ready to go even further left. Um, but then again, there are some other movements that could be characterized as anarchist in character. The EZLN, the Zapatistas in Mexico, as well as Rojava, which is mostly in Syria, both have a system that's more close to a libertarian municipalist system, where there's a lot of local control and power flows up from the bottom instead of being top down. So you definitely could characterize those as more in line with anarchism than communism, but it definitely has elements of both. Um, but anyway, let's get into the book now. So Salt and Pepper says, here in Pennsylvania, when you call yourself an anarchist, you get asked if you're a terrorist. Well, yeah, and that's part of the that's part of what capitalism does, is to avoid actually having to compete with other systems of thought. It will just go ahead and smear them, so that people don't even consider them. Like, hey, growing up, I grew up in the U.S. as well, and you kind of think of anarchism as something that appeals to young boys because it's like no rules, and you do whatever you want, all this sort of thing, which is, of course, that's not actually what political anarchism is, but that's what the society has trained everyone up to believe, um, because it serves their purpose as painting anarchism as not worth taking seriously. They want you to believe that it's something that young boys in their clubhouse would like, but couldn't really be a way to organize society. Um, so that's definitely by design, but it doesn't take that much. All you would have to do is say, give the conquest of bread to a high school student, and whether or not they ended up liking the philosophy by the end of it, at least they would have a much better understanding. Or I think you could give them this book as well, and either way, they would have a much better understanding that no, anarchism is not just bomb throwing and chaos and no rules and no government and not any of that sort of thing. There's a lot more to it, and it's more about flattening out and horizontalizing the power structures that control all of our lives, and giving more people a say in their day-to-day lives, in every realm of their day-to-day lives, be it personal, political, or economic. Um, Salt and Pepper says, as Macknell pointed out, the Bolsheviks just created a new bourgeois class out of the political class. That definitely is, I believe, a valid way to look at what happened with the USSR. Now, there's a whole lot of moving parts that go into that. If you wanted to be more charitable to the way things played out, you could say that they meant to give power back to the people. They meant to have a real dictatorship of the proletariat, but because of forces from the outside, namely the West, trying to destroy them at every turn, and because of forces from within their country, the former capitalists, former landowners who were pretty mad about not having power anymore, they were just never able to give power back. It would have been too dangerous to risk giving power to people who had come through a lot of change very quickly and maybe wouldn't be ready to take on that responsibility. So if you're being charitable, you could definitely see it that's the way that you could see it as the way that see it as happening that way. If you're being less charitable, you could say, well, they just use that as an excuse to hold on to power. Every time it came down to it, there was always an excuse, a pretext that they could use to cling to power. Um, so in many ways, I would say that the way that the power structure ended up being was somewhat similar to a bourgeois state. There was still the elite few who got the most power and the most resources to them. Although I would say it's not fair to say it was a one-to-one comparison, because the average um, status of say what used to be a peasant rose quite a bit in the time that the USSR was uh, a thing. I mean, they went from being, uh, it's not exactly, they went from being basically medieval technological peasants to beating the US in the space race um, in every metric except for being the first to land on the moon. So that all happened within what, uh, like 40 years? 40 years, really? 45 years, maybe? Um, 50 years at the most. Yeah, I guess it's closer to 50 years, but still, in a couple of generations, they went from being mostly peasants and agrarian to a technologically advanced world superpower. Uh, and a lot of people were lifted up in the process. It seems from the things that I've read that most of the social progress happened at the very beginning under Lenin, and then when he tragically died and Stalin took over, uh, things regressed a little bit. So yeah, I mean, we'll probably at some point get more into books that look critically at the USSR from both sides, not from the Western perspective, because that's not. I mean, anyone who grows up in the West already has that perspective, so it's not really necessary to add on to it. But also, they have a lot of reasons to again smear any sort of system that does not benefit them. So anything that's not capitalism. All right, let's get into the chapter here. So once again, this is we're using Audible Anarchist, a really great resource. I will link this particular chapter in the chat. And the chapter is Anarchy Possible?
Was made in collaboration with Audible Anarchist.
Feel free to ask any questions you have. This is a learning space.
Chapter 21. Is anarchy possible? It might be possible,
that would be a good
you
one,
say,
Salt and
if we could
Pepper.
do without government. But can we? Perhaps we can best answer your question by examining your own life. What role does the government play in your existence? Does it help you live? Does it feed, clothe, and shelter you? Do you need it to help work or play? If you are ill, do you call the physician or the policeman? Can the government give you greater ability than nature endowed you with? Can it save you from sickness, old age, or death? Consider your daily life, and you will find that in reality, government is no factor in it at all, except when it begins to interfere in your affairs, when it compels you to do certain things, or prohibits you from doing others. It forces you, for instance, to pay taxes and support it, whether you want to or not. It makes you don a uniform and join the army.
Not quite on the same level there, those two examples. I would say that forced conscription is a little bit more egregious in terms of bodily autonomy and application of force than is making you pay taxes for the services that you probably benefit from, roads, education, stuff like that. So maybe not fair to put them both out there as though they're equal. But this is an argument that anarchists like to use a lot, and it's the idea that in your daily life, you don't really need to have someone telling you what to do all the time. People don't just spontaneously, murder and steal from one another. Um, those, the worst sorts of things that people do are almost always caused by the circumstances that people find themselves in. Um, so for most of your daily life, especially if you're someone that lives in like an American suburb, quite likely you almost never interact with the government directly. Probably never been to a town hall meeting. Probably haven't never had a need to. Like the most that most American suburbanites would have to interact with the government would be is if they give you a special assessment. A special assessment is when they're going to put in some sort of infrastructure. Usually it's a road that they are rebuilding or building or upgrading or something like that is adjacent to your property. And they will give you a special tax to help defray some of the cost. It's nowhere near. It's usually about maybe 10% of the full cost of that little stretch in front of your house. It's about 10% of the total cost at most of what is needed for that. But it's just a way. It's a common way to help raise more money for public works projects like roads in front of your place. But yeah, most of the time you're not thinking about the government. You're not doing anything with the government. You just go about your life. You don't need to be told how to raise a family. You don't need to be told to work. Most people just want to contribute in one way or another to society. Although that definitely changes the lower down the economic ladder you are, the less choice you end up having. But regardless, most people want to do something to feel useful, to feel like they're contributing. So for most of your daily life, you behave basically as an anarchist. You have the relationships you do with people because you want to. It's mutually beneficial, hopefully. You don't hurt one another, hopefully. So it's just the idea that it's trying to normalize the idea of anarchism, to make it not seem quite so scary or foreign or extreme, because in many ways it's not really. Like it's been dressed up to be synonymous, as I was saying, with chaos and terrorism and just having no rules and that sort of thing, like the road warrior or Escape from LA or any of these dystopian sort of movies especially from the 80s and 90s. But that's not really what it's about. It's about people mostly just living their lives and not having to be coerced to do much of anything. But let's continue on.
Invades your personal life, orders you about, coerces you, prescribes your behavior, and generally treats you as it pleases. It even tells you what you must believe and punishes you for thinking and acting otherwise. It directs what you must eat and drink, and imprisons you or shoots you for disobeying. It commands you and dominates every step of your life. It treats you as a bad boy or as an irresponsible child who needs the strong hand of a guardian, but if you disobey it, it holds you responsible nevertheless.
Yeah, that's a good comment. Very very timely there, Salt and Pepper. Who says, "I think that people who oppose anarcho-communist ideas confuse not wanting to work under capitalism with laziness, and believe that no one would work if it weren't for the starvation factor." Yeah, if it wasn't for the worker starve threat, and then that's exactly what Berkman is talking about now. That these people think that unless you have a large authoritarian hand weighing down on you at all times, you're just going to be, I don't even know how to pronounce it, wastrel or wastrel. It's one of those old ways of calling you a bum, basically, and that no one would do anything, nothing would get done if it wasn't for the coercive notion that you have to work somewhere or you're going to starve to death. And that's just not true. That's just not true. To take another example of people's home lives, uh, you know, if you live with other people, whether that's a family, whether that's roommates, whether that's a significant other, there's probably work that needs to be done. There's, keeping the house clean. There's all sorts of chores. We call them chores as though they're, fundamentally different than any other sort of labor, but they're not really. It's about maintaining your house and keeping everyone uh, fed and happy and getting along. And well, sure, sometimes people shirk their chores or try to pass it off on other people. For the most part, things get done in most situations. I mean, maybe your roommate doesn't wash the dishes as fast as you would like, but eventually things get done. There's no government that has to intervene to tell you all that. There's no real consequences if you don't do that. I mean, if everyone just left all the chores, as long as rent was still being paid, um, I mean, you could be free to live in your filth all you want, but most people don't choose to because most people understand that it's only right for everyone to do things to maintain a household. Um, so if you just take that and apply that to society, everyone understands that the garbage still needs to be picked up, that buses still need to run, or you know that education still needs to take place, that people still need food, and all the basics of life are still needed. Um, so if left to their own devices, the idea is that people would still do these things. They're not just going to sit there and let everything crumble, and they're not just going to live off the work of everybody else. Because eventually, if too many people did that, society would break down, and you would no longer be able to get the necessities of life. So it's the idea that people understand that these things are important, and that uh, you know salt and pepper, as you mentioned. A lot of people just don't want to work capitalist jobs because they see them as useless, and oftentimes they are. If you read David Graeber's Bullshit Jobs, he estimates about 40% of all jobs in Western countries are absolutely useless, contribute nothing. They are things like being a yes man to a powerful person to make them, or just working for them, working under them so that they can turn around to their boss and say, I have so many people working under me. Uh, I forgot exactly what he dubbed that, but then there's duct tapers. There's people that their entire job is to pretend to fix things, basically, or to do really terrible patch jobs on things because the right materials are not available, or um, something about the bureaucratic system doesn't allow for actual fixes. Um, there's there are jobs like the insurance industry, which is completely superfluous. If we had universal health care, there would be no insurance, no health insurance at all. Um, So there's not wanting to work those sorts of jobs, and that being a justified thing to feel. Um, but then there's the idea that no one would want to do any of the jobs, especially the hard ones. But I don't think that's true. I think, if tomorrow we could wave a wand and say, we now live in anarchy. There's no longer a state to coerce you to do things. Um, there would still be people who would want to keep their city clean by picking up the garbage. There would still be people that would want to make sure that utilities are functioning for people. Um, and if they were having all of their needs met as they did these things, could feel a whole lot of pride that they were contributing to a system that works both for them and for everybody else. Um, and sure, there might be some people that take advantage, but I, I think that's the far and away the exception rather than the rule. Most people want to contribute. In fact, there's been many studies and they come at it from different angles, but when they ask questions like, what is your number one criteria for job satisfaction? Or what is the number one thing that would make you stay at a job or leave a job? It's always feeling like you are actually contributing something of use, doing something useful. Time and time again comes to the top of the list. It's not compensation, even. It's not scheduling. It's not even whether or not you have a good boss. Those are all factors, but they come in behind feeling like you are contributing something of value. So just taking that as a common driving force of people, it's not so unreasonable to think that even without the coercive power of government and business, people would still want to contribute, still feel like their lives are meaningful and that their work is meaningful. Um, and that would probably mean that the important stuff would still get done. I mean, how many people go into education because of the money? Like, um, how many people go into any sort of care work because of the money? It's never very good. I think the worst uh, cost of a degree versus the starting salary of any field, I believe, is still social work. So you really have to have people that to go into that field. You really have to like helping people. You really have to like helping people so much that you don't mind being in debt for the rest of your life. So, uh, so Salt and Pepper also says, and a lot of lazy behavior is caused by underlying issues that can be addressed with being put in fulfilling jobs and having access to mental health care. Absolutely. I would be really interested to find out how much of mental health issues are directly caused by these sorts of things, by having to live under capitalism, by being forced to do jobs that you don't feel useful in doing, that grind you down physically and mentally, um, and that never compensate you enough to not be struggling. It'd be really interesting to find out how much is directly caused just by um, being under capitalism, how much mental health issues are. And so you also say, as in media, a lot of state jobs like police and military are glorified by media uh, that put them at a higher level of honorability than other jobs that folks may be passionate about. Yeah, that is definitely true. Some reason we always glorify the enforcement wing of government. And I think that's in large part because that's how businesses want it. Uh, the wing of the government that works most directly for big businesses to keep that coercive force against workers, to make sure they don't think about striking, or don't think about asking for a higher wage too much. It's almost always the executive branch that is physically pushing people to stop trying to ask for more. And so it is glorified. It's glorified in TV and movies, glorified by government officials who are, bought and paid for by uh, business interests. It's not really that confusing or that mysterious to figure out why it is that the parts of government that are most responsible for holding classes down or holding the working class down are also the ones that are most venerated by powerful people. All right, let's move on in the chapter.
Yes. We shall consider later the details of life under anarchy and see what conditions and institutions will exist in that form of society, how they will function, and what effect they are likely to have upon man. For the present, we want to make sure that such a condition is possible, that anarchy is practicable. What is the existence of the average man today? Almost all your time is given to earning your livelihood. You are so busy making a living that you hardly have time left to live, to enjoy life. Neither the time nor the money. If you are lucky, you have some sort of support, some job. Now and then comes slack time. There is unemployment, and thousands are thrown out of work every year in every country. That time means no income, no wages. It results in worry and privation, in disease, desperation, and suicide. It spells poverty and crime. To alleviate that poverty, we build homes of charity, poorhouses, free hospitals.
Boy, I'm so glad we don't have poorhouses anymore. You'll often hear people that really love capitalism talking about how we should just have, all the people that cannot work under capitalism. Maybe they've been injured, maybe they just have a disability from some congenital reason. Um, that they should basically just be at the mercy of charity, because if you let people have as much of their own money as possible by not taxing them, they'll be more likely to give to charities and stuff. Uh, but we've seen what that system produces. You know, once it gets to the end of the year, I do plan to go through A Christmas Carol because it's a pretty good anti-capitalist book, and he talks about there was this phrase that Dickens had come across, the idea that there's just too many workers. They are the surplus population. And he was so offended by that phrase that he put it into his book and had Scrooge say, you know, um, uh, the people from the poorhouse or from some charity had come to see Scrooge at the beginning of the book, and they were trying to convince him to give more to charity. And he's like, "Are there not poorhouses? Are there not workhouses and stuff like that?" Um, and the people from the charity were like, "Yes, but I wish they. I'm sad to say there still are because they are horrible places. And some men would rather die than to go into a poorhouse." And then Scrooge says, "Good. Well, they better hurry up and do it and decrease the surplus population." This is the system under unfettered capitalism. It is people literally begging for their lives on the street or in poorly run uh, charities like poorhouses. Um, it's not good. A lot of people really just die from poverty because of that, because they get hurt, because they never have uh, the right skills to compete, or there's just too many people to compete with. They just end up dying. They're not even taken care of. Yes, and you're right. Charity is only necessary because of social failing itself, and because under societal failing. Yeah, gotcha. Um, and because under capitalism, it's legal to take the um, the surplus labor value of your employees just because you're an owner of a business. So if that were not legal, if to own a business, you had to give people exactly how much they made for your business minus the expenses of running the business, then all workers would get a whole lot more money. It couldn't all just be siphoned to the top. If the only sort of structure that was allowed was one where workers all had democratic say in pay, people would get a lot more money on average. Um, so, yeah, and I mean, it just shows the prejudice too of people that really love capitalism, because then they will come back and say, "Well, we can't really trust workers to run the business. They'll just run it into the ground. Um, they'll take all the money for themselves, and they'll let the business fail and all this stuff." But at the same time, they're saying that all the worst off people should be at the mercy uh, of rich people that are just charitable and see a need to help one another out. So rich people are cast as being very, magnanimous and generous and stuff like that. But then at the same time, they view all workers as just selfish and short sighted and all of these things. So unless you can explain why one class is inherently one thing and one is another, then the argument doesn't make sense that somehow all the richest people just happen to be the most far-seeing and generous, and all the poorest people happen to be just short-sighted and selfish. I don't buy that one bit. So Salt and Pepper says, boss takes $1,000 from you and buys a $30 dinner for the less fortunate, and then and the less fortunate are expected to be grateful. Absolutely, that too. And I mean, charities themselves, I'm sure from the time that charities have even been a thing, have been mostly a thing, a way for the rich to dodge taxes and get social credit, basically for being so wise and generous, and basically to, I mean, even to launder money, really, because you can put relatives on the board of your charity and they can draw, a salary, $50,000 a year, 100,000, doesn't really matter. You can set it pretty much whatever you want. And their only requirements is to come to a meeting a few times a year, come to the board meeting. So you can pretty easily just siphon a whole bunch of other people's money to your family members without them actually having to do labor either, and at the same time take a huge tax break for yourself, which is a big reason why, yeah, Trump, incredibly notorious for doing this sort of thing. In fact, they've been barred from operating a charity within the state of New York because of their just, blatant money laundering schemes. I think one of his New York charities. Oh, you're gonna come join?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. My wife Amanda's gonna come join.
What's up, everybody?
I was in the middle of saying something, but thanks for interrupting. One of Trump's New York charities, uh, I think it was one of his New York ones, got in trouble because they used donor funds to purchase a like $30,000 portrait of Trump, and then I guess they just kind of tried to keep it for themselves. Oh, Salt and Pepper says hello. She says hi. She's gonna come on camera pretty quick here
No,
as soon as she gets her stuff together.
I'm gonna do it from over here.
Oh yeah, you're just gonna be from the background. Oh my god. Well,
You
well,
really do come
while
true.
Amanda
It's
is
spooky.
setting up, let's continue on in the chapter here.
All of which you support with your taxes. To prevent crime, to punish the criminals, it is again you who have to support the police, detectives, state forces, judges, lawyers, prison keepers. Can you imagine anything more senseless and impractical? The legislature passed laws, the judges interpret them, the various officials execute them, the police track and arrest the criminal, and
Oh
finally the
yes.
prison warden gets him into custody. Numerous persons and institutions are busy keeping the jobless man from stealing and punish him if he tries to do so. Then he is provided with a means of existence, the lack of which has made him break the law in the first place.
Yeah.
After a shorter or longer term, he is turned loose.
There's a really great episode of This Is Hell. I'll try and find it as we're going through the chapter here. But it's on the concept of the deserving poor and how a lot of systems, such as like food support, they have a really robust anti-fraud department, and they've done calculations and found out that the amount of money that goes into this anti-fraud department is orders of magnitude more than they're actually catching in waste, fraud, and abuse in the systems. So it's costing the whole system more to enforce laws of the poorest of people against the poorest of people from preventing them from cheating just to get extra food or something like that. And this is the case as he's talking about here with the prison system. If people are committing crimes out of desperation, um, they end up going to prison where they finally have 3 square meals a day, a place to sleep that they don't have to pay for, and all the stuff that they could have just been providing to these people in the first place for probably a lower cost than it takes to put them through the prison system. And if they were to just provide this stuff for people on the front end, many less of them would end up needing to go through the penal system, and they would all have a lot more opportunities in their lives to contribute in a more positive way. So the whole system is just it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. How are you doing tonight, Amanda?
I'm okay.
It's good. I think you're probably not on camera all the way.
That's okay.
Oh, you're just gonna sit over on the side there?
Yeah.
No, I like having a balanced frame.
Oh,
In fact, let's put us.
I don't suffer from OCD. I enjoy it.
You enjoy it very much. Salt and Pepper says it also costs cities more money in investing in anti-homeless architecture. Yup. Uh, and imprisoning homeless, and on all the policing that it takes to um, prevent crimes of necessity than it would to just house them. And they found this to be true just in general, that if you build housing for the homeless people, it costs the city less. Like every time they've tried a system where they just give homeless people housing, it has cost them less per year than all the services that go into homelessness, including police, extra policing, um, trips to the emergency room that are of course unpaid for,
Mhm.
uh, all these other things. And at the same time, the number one factor in back up 1 second. One of the greatest factors in making people homeless is things like addiction, which come from uh,
Untreated mental health
untreated
issues.
mental health issues, just having a lot of stuff thrown at you in your life. That tends to be the number one factor that leads to addiction. And most people that are homeless long term also have substance abuse issues. And they've found that once you just give people housing, there's a much greater likelihood that they'll be able to get themselves clean, at least to the point where they can, get a job that they can hold down. It's just a huge. I mean, it's really about dignity, you know.
Hmm.
If you feel like the world hates you and you feel completely worthless, you're at the rock bottom that a person can be at.
You're not going to be motivated to do anything.
Right. Right. It's a huge hit. That alone is a huge hit to your mental state. But just having that stability of a house, a place that's just your own, where no one can rob you, you don't have to sleep with one eye open
Hmm.
because no one really looks out for homeless people's rights.
A lot of people are just scared or like,
Mhm.
ew, you're gross. It's like,
Mhm. Just having that stability where you can take a shower, wash your clothes even.
mhm. They say
Um,
that's like some of the biggest things, like in
yeah,
dealing with like depression and stuff,
yeah, because
is like take a bath,
yeah,
brush your teeth.
right.
It's one small thing, but like starting somewhere. And I'm not saying it's a cure all, it's just something that can kind of help pick your mood up
Mhm.
a little bit. But if you don't have access to these things, or you get shunned for trying to use public resources,
Mhm.
you know, it's it's horrible.
It is horrible, and it does. I mean, it doesn't have to be.
Oh, like you don't have to like I don't understand if your baseline needs are being met. Somehow you've managed to pull this off for yourself and you've got your mental capacity enough that you're not like out on the street murdering people or shooting up every day.
Mhm.
Like what damage does it do you personally if someone else is not in that same space and gets help? Like to me that just says, "Hey, if for some reason my job, my life, whatever gets the best of me and I can't hold on anymore, I have something to fall back on."
Right.
And like maybe
It's a
the
safety
outcome
net.
wouldn't be as bad for me when I do, if I do.
Right. Absolutely. And that's the thing too. That that brings up another point that capitalists are always banging on about. It's like, well, I took the risk. I took the risk. What if we had a lot more safety nets for people
Mhm.
so that it wasn't a catastrophe, it wasn't a risk of complete catastrophe to start a business? There'd probably be a lot more people willing to take that risk. There'd be a lot more people willing to try different sorts of businesses, different sorts of enterprises, if they knew that no matter what they did, at least they're not going to end up homeless. At least they're not going to end up starving or without medical care.
Mhm.
That would probably be a good thing. We always talk about the marketplace of ideas and just trying a whole bunch of stuff. And that's how capitalism's so great. If only a select few actually have the backing to be able to take those risks, then we're missing out on tons of ideas, missing out on tons of innovations that could be, if not for that risk factor. And oh, empathy lady, good to see you. Um, anyway, right, I forgot, I lost my train of thought. Um, yeah, I remember where I was going. So like you listen to shows like How I Built This, where they interview entrepreneurs and they go through their story. Every single time in those stories, there's some point where someone took a risk on them. Uh, but also there's a point where they were struggling and they weren't making it. And oftentimes their first or second business failed. But in the background, they're being supported by somebody. It's not as though they were just, living out of a cardboard box as they were trying to get their tech business off the ground or something like that.
Well, and nobody ever asks about the money. Where did you get the funding for this project? No one ever says, "Hey, God, I went to like 15 banks
Yeah.
and had to have X number of co-signers,
Yeah.
or I applied for all these grants.
Yeah.
I applied for 53 grants and I only heard back from 2.
Right.
Like, you don't hear that side because, oh, it's crass to talk about money, but it's like, look
Right.
at somebody like Elon Musk who has Tesla and whatever sort of space crap he's working on. I mean, he's not self-made. He comes from money. And I think a lot of people in these positions where they can do things do come from money.
Small amount of $1 million from daddy.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
what Trump got. Missed a few comments there.
I'm liking this spicy commentary from Salt and Pepper,
Yeah.
or Prepper.
Yeah.
That's great.
Good stuff. So earlier, Salt and Pepper had said,
Prepper.
I said prepper. Sorry if I tripped over the word a little bit. They had said, if we just provide people the basics, food, water, shelter, medical care, the prison, and I would add to that education and transportation and justice and stuff like that, the prison industrial complex would decrease drastically. Yeah, absolutely true. Because so many crimes are just out of there being no other recourse. I just finished reading Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. And spoiler alert for a book that came out before any of us were born. But the main character tries to be honest, tries to just work really hard and keep their nose to the grindstone. But eventually the system grinds them down. He gets injured and he loses his spot at his job, and no amount of work ever gets him back on track. He ends up taking a job in like the lowest level of the stockyards in Chicago, making fertilizer, which is a job they put a life expectancy of just a few years on people that do it. And even that he ends up not being able to hang on to. And eventually he ends up turning to a life of crime. He thinks of himself as an honest man, as just a hardworking man. But after being in jail a few times, he starts talking to the other prisoners, and some of them are just con men, or low-level grifters and stuff like that. And they tell him that the system is of course the system is rigged against you, and the only way you're ever going to get ahead is through crime. And eventually he takes that route, and he actually does really well for a while. Yeah, it's a great book, and I'm definitely planning on covering it at some point, but we got a lot of other more classic theory to get through at the same time. Let's see what other comments we got. Empathy lady says, you're right about the dignity and respect, not just in regard to the homelessness, in everything you're talking about. Circling back to capitalism versus workers having agency in their own jobs and a stake, both financially as well as in the work they're doing. Absolutely true. And when you do have more of a stake in the company that you work for, because you can actually get more profits by working harder, it doesn't all just go to the boss. You flip an extra 100 hamburgers, it's not as though the profits go to you. But when you do have a stake, there is dignity in your work. Then you do feel good about the stuff that you're doing, because you can see what a difference it makes to yourself and to your fellow employees. And if all of a sudden all your fellow employees and yourself are making enough to live on in a job that they weren't formerly, that's a huge boost to your dignity. Now you think that you can make it. It's not that making it's not just reserved for the lucky few. You get born in the right place to the right family. Yeah, the whole capitalism breeds innovation is the biggest lie ever heard. That's right, Salt and Pepper. And especially today with so much intellectual property being kept behind paywalls and being the source of lawsuits and just silly things.
Or like, stuff like vaccines or medication, and people,
Mhm.
oh, I get to slap a patent on it. That was my idea, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
Instead of saying, hey, I found a recipe that works for this thing. Let's share it with everybody so we can all get better.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. But instead, they these companies hold it back because they can use it as legal ammo to sue one another.
Mhm.
And I mean, just think how much better music would be if there wasn't constant fights over copyrights. Because this artist took a 5 note bar out of another artist's song, and like it's so silly when you look at virtually all innovation, virtually all art is derivative to some degree. You don't start from the very basics and build it up. It's not as though um, an artist invents an entire new instrument and invents a way of reading and writing music, and then puts out their song. They learn music one way or another. That comes from the labor and the innovation of countless generations before you. Same thing with literature. All authors are influenced heavily by other authors from generations past.
So there are no new ideas.
So at the most, you're putting a little cherry on the top of the sundae that was handed to you from all the generations before you, and then calling the whole sundae your own, and then suing other people if they make a similar sundae. Absolutely ridiculous.
Mhm.
And it is incredibly stifling. Instead of looking at art as a way to um, build cultural expression and to communicate with one another on a different level, and as something that can be collaborative, where I mean, there are plenty of musical traditions where it is common to sample from other artists. um, it's seen as a compliment. You're riffing off of the stuff that they do, and you're giving them credit at the same time for doing it.
Or you're pushing it further, taking it to a place that maybe the original artist hadn't intended. Like, not
Right.
in a bad way, but like they weren't thinking in that
Sure,
term, or they
yeah.
didn't interpret
Yeah.
their piece that way. And I think that's a lot of, having been an art major myself, that's a lot of beauty in things when people see your work and it inspires them, or it gets them to think about things, or even offer you suggestion that shifts your focus through your creative process.
Right.
And that's why they call it constructive criticism.
Right. So in a society, too, where artists didn't have to worry about being starving artists, they didn't have to worry about making the right connections in order to even be able to make a living at art or writing or whatever. In a society where everyone's needs were met, there'd be a lot more artists, there'd be a lot more authors, there'd be a lot more creative works of all kinds.
Because people would have time to put into that. And I think,
And they'd be able to take the risk too. It comes back to risk as well. And also access to education. If people all had access to whatever education they wanted, you could learn to sculpt like you've always wanted to.
and also, like, it would be good for a lot of people's mental health, because that is often something that's suggested if you start going to therapy, is like, find a hobby. Do you like to draw? Do you like to paint? Do you like to, like, what do you create? Maybe you like writing. I certainly don't. Maybe you want to sing. Like, finding that outlet for you to be creative, because creativity helps people process things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely true. Absolutely. But I mean, there could be so many more gifts from people that they could then offer to the world if they just had the ability to stop worrying about baseline survival.
Like Fight Club.
There could be a fight club. I
Yeah.
suppose there could be.
They don't call it martial arts for nothing, Zach.
I'm missing the pun there, but okay. Well, we'll continue on the chapter.
If he fails to get work, he begins the same round of theft, arrest, trial, and
You can pick it
imprisonment
up if you want.
all over again. This is a rough but typical illustration of the stupid character of our system. Stupid and inefficient. Law and government support that system. Is it not peculiar that most people imagine that we could not do without government, when in fact our real life has no connection with it whatever, no need of it, and is only interfered with where law and government seep in? But security and public order, you object. Could we have that without law and government?
Did you want to say something there?
You were almost wrapping my headphones up
Oh,
and
sorry.
you got your water.
I'm sorry about that.
It's okay.
So now he's getting into security, and that's a common question. How do you have security in an anarchist system?
Who would protect us against the criminal? The truth is
Social
that what is called
workers.
law and order is really the worst disorder, as we have seen in previous chapters. What little order and peace that we do have is due to good common sense and the joint effort of the people, mostly in spite of the government. Do you need the government to tell you not to step in front of a moving automobile? Do you need it to order you not to jump off the Brooklyn Bridge or from the Eiffel Tower? Man is a social being. He cannot exist alone. He lives in communities or societies. Mutual need and common interest result in certain arrangements to afford us security and comfort. Such co-working is free, voluntary. It needs no compulsion by any government. You join a sporting club or a singing society because your inclinations lie that way, and you cooperate with the other members without anyone coercing you. The man of science, the writer, the artist, and the inventor all seek their own kind for inspiration and mutual work. Their impulses and needs are their best urge. The interference of any government or authority can only hinder their efforts. All through life, you will find that the needs and inclinations of people make for association, for mutual protection and help. That is the difference between managing things and governing men, between doing something from free choice and being compelled. It is the difference between liberty and constraint, between anarchism and government, because anarchism means voluntary cooperation instead of forced participation. It means harmony and order in place of interference and disorder. But who will protect us against crime and criminals, you demand? Rather ask yourself whether government really protects us against them. Does not the government itself create and uphold the conditions which make for crime?
When do the cops show up?
Yeah, after the crime has been committed. And how often do they actually catch the thief of your 1989, 18 AA battery boombox? Almost never.
Unless it's Steve
They
Martin.
hardly even file a report.
Steve Martin, Short, and Selena Gomez. Then they catch him right away.
That's right away. It took the whole season to catch them.
There's a joke, Zach.
Oh, okay. Anyway.
And also, when the police come in, they're usually escalating the situation because
that's often the case as well.
They come in hot. They don't have all the information. They're immediately assuming the worst instead of walking in calmly, making sure that they've gone to the right place, and then asking the people who are there what's going on. So I, as mentioned many times before, I work in an EBD program. It's emotional behavioral disorders. And I go through a training program every year called CPI, and it's crisis prevention intervention. And the last option I have when a student gets upset is to go hands-on. But I have to have exhausted 5 other steps prior before that point hits.
Yeah.
And I'm also taught tactics, if a student's showing anxiety, they need to be given short directions. Sit down.
Mhm.
Problem 1.
Mhm.
And you sit with them, you work them down off the ledge. Or maybe you do a sensory check-in. And I realize adult situations are very different from child situations, but you're both people, and if you're in an escalated situation and the person that's supposed to help you comes in screaming, you make the situation worse, not better. And that's usually how Officer Friendly comes in.
Yeah, who is often not trained at all in whatever it is they need to be dealing with, especially if it has to do with mental health.
Mhm.
So wellness
Right.
checks often turn into a hail of bullets and really bad endings,
Right. Instead of
or domestic abuse, domestic disputes turn into someone getting roughed up or killed by the cops.
yeah, I actually that reminds me of a funny story of my roommates. So my former roommates when I met you.
Mhm.
So my roommate had just had a child and they were coming home from the hospital. I was not home at the time that this had occurred, and they had called because they had misplaced their keys and they weren't able to reach me to get in the house. Someone else was having a domestic dispute up the street, like really close to us, like same St. Anthony, but different situation. Okay, whatever.
Mhm.
The p- and there was a miscommunication. So when the police showed up at our place to simply let us in or them into the house, they came out guns drawn. My friend carrying newborn was forced to the ground to lay down, throw the baby on the ground,
Jeez.
and like spread him. And her spouse, same deal. And then only when they were on the ground, guns pointed at them, did the officer bother to clarify that this was simply just needing to be let in the house. When the newborn is on the grass screaming.
Yeah.
Or no, it was winter. It was snowing. It was in the snow crying.
Jeez. That's horrible.
But also, like, how do you not see a family and a tiny baby going into the house
Mhm.
and you think that's the domestic? Like, people that are in domestic situations
Oh,
don't
that
abuse
happens.
in public.
That happens all the time too.
It's
Is
behind
they
closed
go to the
doors.
wrong place and then someone gets shot,
Mhm.
um, or they do the no-knock warrants as well. Like a lot of times, police are responsible for the violence that happens.
Right.
But just before we,
Oh,
we
so
continue on with this, I wanted to put in an article from the New York Times. There was a study of three, mid-sized U.S. cities. The three cities were New Orleans, Montgomery County, Maryland, and Sacramento, and they found that the time that they divided up the time that they spend doing different tasks that the police force does doing different tasks, and they found that in all three cases, only 4%, including paperwork, was devoted to violent crime, and that's within our current system right now. So imagine a system where
hmm.
a lot of that crime never would take place in the first place. How much would the police actually be needed? And maybe the answer is still sometimes. Sometimes there might be people that are willing to harm others, um, and will only be stopped by other force. But we can probably safely devote at least 96% of our resources to more appropriate departments, because in those other those other all of those other ways that they spend their time, non-criminal calls, traffic, other crime, property crime, proactive, and medical or other, none of that needs to involve a person with a gun who has been authorized by the city to use
Mhm.
deadly force if necessary. None of that does. Those could all be handled by other departments.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of comments.
Yeah, so Salt and Pepper says a few years ago, a friend was assaulted. It took the police 2 hours to get there, got the other person's statement, and basically said that it's their word against hers, so they would have to arrest her too. See, and I've yeah, yeah. The police just often don't even want to be involved at all. Like they feel annoyed. Like
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, that's great that you're blowing us up. That's cool. Cops maintain responsibility. Main responsibility is to make money for the state. That's absolutely true.
And they have a quota. Like,
Yeah,
hey, you got to
especially
give
the
out so
traffic
many
cops.
tickets.
Yeah, but there's no
Um,
reason that you have to bring a gun to a traffic stop. I mean, they're
Mhm.
all, all these law and order types are like, well, sometimes cops get shot in the face at a traffic stop. Well,
How often does that actually happen?
it's incredibly rare. But beyond that, would anyone shoot a cop if they knew the cop didn't have a gun themselves? They would just drive away. I mean,
Yeah.
and in which case you have their information. There's no need to put other lives in danger by doing a high-speed chase or any of that stuff. You could just go find them later on. They're likely going to go back to their house, or you'll find a report of the car abandoned or whatever it is. But there's no reason for violence to occur. It
Mhm.
never needs to escalate to that level.
It is interesting though to see how scared they are now in situations. So at my work, I work with the CBD program, and we had a student. We'll name him Frankie, or
Mhm.
them Frankie, and Frankie decided to leave the premises, like walk across the street, down the road to a park, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, our protocol is to notify the police department, and uh, let's just say they took their time getting to us. But at that point, we had them back at school, and the officer had made a comment to the effect of like, uh, I wasn't going to rush over here. There's too many people watching what I do right now. So I have to be extra careful
Yeah.
about how I handle
Boo-hoo.
situations.
Oh, we all feel so bad that you have to be on your best behavior.
Like, I'm sorry, you don't get to just pull your gun on a 10-year-old.
It's not like it used to be where you could just like billy
Shoot
club
'em.
anyone that you saw and
Yeah.
like
You look suspicious.
carry children off by their ankles if they talk back to you or look at you crossways.
So it was just kind of interesting to like,
No, they will drive to Mexico if they didn't do high speed chase. That would take a few fill-ups in the meantime. For most, well, I guess if you're on a border state with Mexico, maybe not, but or
Yeah.
do donuts and cemeteries. Yeah.
Though there's not so much space to do donuts in cemeteries anymore. They got everything so close together. Now I want to do that. That's what I'm gonna do next week. I'm on spring break next week.
Oh, you're gonna go out and do donuts? There
I'm
might
gonna.
not even be any snow left by that point.
I don't care.
It's just gonna do it in a parking lot. And
Yeah.
you can wear out our nice tires. That's nice. Cops that show up because donuts.
And then they'll be disappointed when they get there because it wasn't the kind of donuts
no.
that they
Then
were
they'll be
hoping
super
for.
angry and they'll be looking to crack down on somebody.
And then they're gonna pull their taser.
Oh, don't. That's so sad. That's incredibly tragic. And then
It
she only
is-
gets 2 years for it.
No, she doesn't. Did you see the stuff
Oh.
that came out? It's technically only a year
Oh, that's right.
because
yeah,
her
so-
release is in 2023.
yeah,
So let's not even. No, we don't do that, okay?
Yeah,
No.
Okay. Oh
Right.
boy.
I'm gonna get kicked off the show already.
You're not going to get kicked off the show. Let's continue on.
Does not the invasion and violence upon which all governments rest cultivate the spirit of intolerance and persecution, of hatred and more violence? Does not crime increase the growth of poverty and injustice fostered by government? Is it not government itself the greatest injustice and crime? Crime is the result of economic conditions, of social inequality, of wrongs and evils of which government and monopoly are parents. Government and law can only punish the criminal. They can neither cure nor prevent crime. The only real cure for crime is to abolish its causes, and this the government can never do,
Right.
because it is there to preserve those very causes.
Can't or won't.
Crime can be eliminated only by doing
Yeah,
away
both.
with the conditions that create it. Government cannot do it. Anarchism
Slight bone of contention with that because government could provide the basics for people's survival. Government could distribute these things. I don't think it's a
Priority?
implausible system to imagine. Um, so yeah, I don't think that's necessarily the case. And also, I tend to define government much more broadly than a lot of anarchists would. I think the government can be fairly said to be anytime you have a group of people that have an agreed set of rules and ways of resolving disputes. So that could be a family house government. That could be a friend group. That could be any sort of arrangement, whether or not it's officially sanctioned. I mean, governments do a lot to dress up the fact that they're only governments because of at one point they forced the issue. They conquered another people or pushed them away or, just destroyed them. Uh, and then they put an official seal on things and now they're a legitimate government. But that's just as legitimate as a family.
Who's the boss
Right.
now?
So I would say also that even under a system as Lenin described it, although it seems as though he never achieved this system, but the system that he at least said that he was going for was one where there was still top-down control, but it was for the benefit of the workers. It was a worker state, a dictatorship of the proletariat, and that you would have control from the other direction, from the bottom up, by things like being able to recall your elected representatives at any time, um, by not having the lure of power attached to any government position, like they were all supposed to only make a workman's wage. They certainly wouldn't have the privileges that Nancy Pelosi has to, invest in the stock market and stuff like that. So he envisioned a system where things would be set up for the benefit of the worker, and basically through representatives, the workers would have their will about how things are structured. So that could produce a system where, the people through the government do provide, or the government through the actions of the people, I should say, do provide for all the needs of society. They, act as the central distribution force. They direct work, um, and but people have the ultimate say by their elected representatives. So I think that is a possible system as well. Um, I also tend to prefer a more bottom up approach, especially while we have relative uh, relative safety and stability afforded by a first world capitalist system. I think it'd be fertile grounds for building a bottom up movement that would then be able to withstand and hold its shape. If the government crumbled for one reason or another, um, or if there was any sort of revolt, or if climate change just destroyed the capitalist lines of production so much that everything folded, all the other systems folded. I think that we still could build a system from the bottom up that would hold in a situation like that, where people would have the experience and the tradition of being a part of the government. And that too, if everyone was a part of the government, that would still be the government providing stuff, or at least orchestrating things in one way or another, even if it was just to set up systems of mutual aid. So, yeah, little points of contention with Bergman, but I think overall his point is pretty good.
Means to do away with those conditions. Crime resulting from government, from its oppression and injustice, from equality and poverty, will disappear under anarchy. These constitute by far the greatest percentage of crime. Certain other crimes will persist from time to time, such as those resulting from jealousy, passion, from the spirit of coercion and violence which dominates the world today. But these, the offspring of authority and possession, will also gradually disappear under wholesome conditions, with the passing away of the atmosphere that cultivated them. Anarchy will therefore neither breed crime nor offer any soil for its thriving. Occasionally, antisocial acts will be looked upon as survivals of former diseased conditions and attitudes, and will be treated as an unhealthy state of mind rather than as a crime. Anarchy would begin by feeding the criminal and securing him work instead of first watching him, arresting him, trying him, imprisoning him, and finally ending by feeding him, and the many others who have to watch and feed him. Surely even this example shows how much more sensible and simpler life would be under anarchism than it is now.
And so again, this is imagining a perfect system, a system where everyone knows what's going on, everyone's ready for that sort of change, thinks it's possible, and the people can just kind of take over where the government left off. I don't think we're at a state right now. Like, I mean, if it's to the point in the US where most people think of anarchy as bomb throwing and terrorism and no rules and all that sort of thing, I'd say we have a long way to go in terms of educating the general population before, anyone would be ready to have a system that's beyond capitalism. So I think a big part of any movement should be education. I think really the two greatest things that any sort of leftist movement could do right now would be to provide free education, so getting people used to these ideas, demystifying them, making them not seem scary anymore, um, helping them to understand how to organize and act for themselves, and then number two, securing people housing that they wouldn't ever have to worry about anything but maybe paying taxes on, because that's still going to be a reality, and maybe paying a little bit for the upkeep, but otherwise just have a place to live. Because I mean, it's just a bit of capitalist realism. This system rewards and defends property more than anything else. So if we can get as many people to have property of their own, personal property, we're talking about in the political sense, not even necessarily talking about private property, but if we can get as many people stabilized with that basic level of housing and get them thinking and acting uh, about organizing, I think those are the two key things that any organization should do in this day and age. But the way that he's talking about it, it makes it seem like you could just flip a switch and then everyone's just gonna be, oh, sure, anarchy. Let's do things that way. That there wouldn't be people who would want to actively push the system back. That there wouldn't be people that would lose in that system, because there definitely would be. There would be a lot of middle and upper class people that would lose in a system like that, because they would be forced to give up a lot of their power over other people. And it's always important to keep that in mind, that the power they would be giving up is the power to dominate other people through their ownership of businesses and through their ability to manipulate government with their money. But it still wouldn't just be everyone gaining power. Some people would lose out in that situation. It's just they would be losing out for the benefit of everyone, and they wouldn't be losing everything either necessarily. They would just be having a lot of their things forcibly redistributed. But in the end, as long as they could play nice and not try and reassert control through murder and domination and terror, if they could get along in the new society, they would be given all the same basics of life as everyone else. So overall, it would be more freedom for more people. So, but yeah, I think he's being a little bit too simplistic. But this is an introductory text at the same time. This is just getting people used to the idea of anarchism at all in the first place. So,
I think some people get anarchism and like nihilism confused,
Oh, that too, yeah.
and it's not true.
And I think that comes from the conflation of anarchy just being pure chaos and people just doing whatever they feel like and not adhering to any sort of beliefs. I mean, it's pretty easy to conflate the two. I can see
Right.
that for sure.
The truth is, present life is unpractical, complex, and confused, and not satisfactory from any point of view.
Oh, there are some questions that I wanted to answer too. So Salt and Pepper says, I think if we leave the state intact with socialists in power, they would be incentivized to keep it and have inside knowledge on revolutionary action, uh, which they would and have used it against us. Yeah. And to me, that kind of does seem to be the way things went with the USSR, especially. The people just in general, I don't think had the basic understanding of what sort of a system they were getting into and how to assert their own power. And yeah, they made excuses to the elites made excuses to hold on to that power, which is why I don't really like the concept of vanguardism, at least as I understand it. And I'm no expert, but from what I understand, the concept is the people that do understand are the ones that lead the revolution, and it's not as important to get everyone on board. It's just important to get enough people on board that you can topple the current order and set up your own. What?
You got a friend that's about to crawl under your camera.
Oh, we're still being plagued by box elder bugs in our house. They're finally starting to leave as it warms up here, but yeah, one might be making his debut any moment. But anyway,
At least he's red and black, so it looks on theme.
yeah, definitely. So with the vanguardist idea, the people that are the most committed and will not betray the party are the ones that go ahead and execute the revolution, and they're the leaders, and then they're supposed to then give the power back to the people. It seems like there was always an excuse under the USSR. Again, I have not studied it closely enough to say for sure that that's the way things went, or to be 100% confident about it. But just from what I have studied, it does seem like they came up with a bunch of excuses to never give power back to the people. So while the average person's life was probably better than it had been before the revolution, it still was never to the point where there was ever a meaningful dictatorship of the proletariat, which there was supposed to be. It was supposed to be rule of the people in a worker state. Um, but I don't think it has to go that way either at the same time. Uh, another movement, another revolution that I haven't studied super closely, but from what I have studied about it, it does seem that in the case of Rojava, it started out as your basic communist leftist movement. You did have a sort of vanguard revolutionary force that went and gained territory for itself, but then through uh, Abdullah Ajlan, the leader of the movement, through him going to prison, being imprisoned by his enemies, and in prison reading Murray Bookchin, the social ecologist, he had a change of heart, and he instructed his party to go ahead and institute a system of basically libertarian municipalism. So in that case, it does seem like it did go according to the way that a communist revolution is supposed to go. Power did go back to the people in a meaningful way, and that's not to say that Rojava is perfect or that they institute their own values perfectly either. Um, for example, even though they're supposed to be following social ecology, they rely very heavily on oil exports to fund themselves. But that's just a reality of the way. So it does seem that it is possible. And also in places like Cuba, they seem to have had gone much further down the revolutionary path than other communist revolutions as well. Again, despite being right next to the U.S., despite from the beginning being undermined by the U.S. At every turn that they possibly could be, um, they held on and did things like land reform and giving people universal health care, some of the best health care coverage in the world. And it does appear that they have, some semblance of representative democracy. People are very willing to participate in the democratic process. They have elections that are very well attended, and it's not because they're forced to do so. It's because people actually believe in the system that they are upholding. What? Break? You need a break? You can just say you need a break. It's okay. We don't have to have some kind of pantomime exchange here. Okay, take a break. Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
If you feel like coming back on tonight, you're definitely welcome to. Although only got an hour to go, so
How long?
an hour.
Hmm.
So we may not even get through this chapter, but that's okay. All right.
Yeah, this is getting into a zone I'm not familiar with. So I'm gonna take my opinions.
Well, that's okay. What are your questions about?
I can't process right now.
Okay, that's fine. We'll talk more. We're definitely going to study Rojava and Cuba a lot more in the future, and also the EZLN.
I'm gonna study this delicious glass of water,
You go right ahead.
which I don't have to pay for.
Thank you, Salt and Pepper. Salt and Pepper says that I have a lovely wife,
Aww.
and
Thanks.
and they are 100% correct. I
Aww.
always like it when you come on the stream.
You guys are so nice. I'm just
Yeah.
really tired.
That's fine. That's fine.
Bye, guys.
Amanda will be on another time.
Maybe later. We'll see. Probably not.
Okay. So you're saying a lot of stuff there, Red Bung. Let's go back. It's a very serious name. I appreciate that. Let's go back and see what you say. Next thing you know, you are the Axis powers, though. Bay just wants to have kids and a new minivan. Go get a job, bro. I have no idea what you're talking about. What is Germany and Italy? What is Germany and Italy? Those are countries. Glad I could help you out with that one. Or communist countries will soon be putting you in vegan gulags. Okay. She's MAGA. Who's MAGA? My wife is definitely not MAGA. I don't know what it is you're talking about. These seem like random thoughts. But if you have something to say about what we're talking about tonight, we were going through Alexander Berkman's What is Communist Anarchism? This one is Anarchy Possible? So if you got some thoughts on that, I would love to hear it. Otherwise, I'm just going to move on because I have no idea what it is you're alluding to here.
That is why there is so much misery and discontent. The worker is not satisfied, nor is the master
Still don't know
happy
what you're
in
talking
his
about, Red
constant
Bone.
anxiety over bad times involving the loss of property and power. The specter of fear for tomorrow dogs the steps of rich and poor alike. Certainly the worker has nothing to lose by a change from government and capitalism to a condition of no government, of anarchy. The middle classes are almost as uncertain.
So we're reading an anarchist book. This is an anarchist communist book. But I guess that's cool that you assume that they're a commie. I kind of doubt you could even define what communism is, but that's fine. I mean, do you see that I got the anarchist A on my hat too? So I also don't identify primarily as a communist. I'm not necessarily opposed to communism, but I think a different strategy is better. I know that they're trying to be a troll, Salt and Pepper, but I just don't understand what they're saying. Like, maybe she's a Build Back Better. Does that mean maybe she likes Biden? Because that's definitely not the case either, and neither do I. I don't know why you would assume that my wife is a MAGA. That doesn't make any sense. And anyway, we'll continue on. If you have some other thoughts I'd love to hear it as long as I can make sense of them.
Of their existence as the workers. They are dependent on the goodwill of the manufacturer and wholesaler, of the large combines of industry and capital, and they are always in danger of bankruptcy and ruin. Even the big capitalist has little to lose by the changing of the present-day system to one of anarchy, for under the latter, everyone would be assured of living and comfort.
Yeah, and again, that's the optimistic view. Um, and I guess it depends on how you define what a capitalist is. If you're just talking about someone that believes in capitalism, well, then yeah, absolutely, for sure. The average person, the average person in the U.S. does still believe in capitalism. They just think that somehow it's going to benefit them more than another system, and I believe they're wrong about that. But if you mean by capitalists, if you mean people that actually own capital, well, then no, they aren't necessarily going to be better off, especially if they own a large business. Now, your average small family business or that sort of thing, yeah, probably wouldn't be too much different under an anarchist system. Um, wouldn't be too much different under a communist system, for that matter. They would basically just keep on keeping on with maybe more controls from the workers, but that's about it. Because everyone would be doing better, or people would be doing better on average. There would be more people that could frequent a small business. So I think probably once things, come out in the wash, it would be that a small business owner wouldn't be that worse off, or would probably be a little bit better off. Also, because there'd be less crime, as we've discussed earlier in this chapter. So in that sense, everyone would be better. There are certain things that you could say that or certain areas where you could say that everyone would be better in, for sure. Having more educated people would be better for everybody. Having healthier people would be better for everybody. I mean, that threatens your own health a lot less if everyone's healthy, right? Uh, so in those in those circumstances, everyone would be better for sure. But just monetarily, assuming we're sticking with a monetary system, uh, yeah, some people would end up being worse off, but that's okay because it would be for the betterment of everyone, and it would be because they would be less able to dominate and exploit other people. So it's just like under when slavery was finally defeated, it was definitely worse off for the slave owners after that fact, or the former slave owners. They, 100% did worse after slavery was abolished because they couldn't dominate people as much, because they couldn't treat them as possessions. So for them, from their point of view, it was worse after slavery, but it was for the betterment of everybody overall. Um, the same would be true of capitalism. For a very few, it would be worse off, but it would be for the betterment of people overall, and just in terms of monetary sense as well. Um, yeah. Anyway, let's continue on.
The fear of competition would be eliminated with the abolition of private ownership. Everyone would have full and unhindered opportunity to live and enjoy his life to the utmost of his capacity. Add to this the consciousness of peace and harmony, the feeling that comes with freedom from financial or material worries, the realization that you are in a friendly world with no envy or business rivalry to disturb your mind, in a world of brothers, in an atmosphere of liberty and general welfare. It is almost impossible to conceive of the wonderful opportunities which would open up to a man in a society of communist anarchism.
Absolutely.
The scientist could fully devote himself to his beloved pursuits without being harassed by his daily bread. The inventor would find every facility at his disposal to benefit humanity by his discoveries and inventions. The writer, the poet, the artist would all rise on the wings of liberty and social harmony to the greatest heights of attainment. Only then would justice and right come into their own. Do not underestimate the role of these sentiments in the life of man or nation. We do not live by bread alone. True, existence is not possible without the opportunity to satisfy our physical needs, but the gratification of these by no means constitutes all of life. Our present system of civilization has, by disinheriting millions, made the belly the center of the universe, so to speak. But in a sensible society, with plenty for all, the matter of mere existence and the security of livelihood would be considered self-evident.
Important to note here as well that we already do have plenty for all. It's only a matter of distribution and political priorities that means that some people have a lot less than they need. We have way more food. We have way more capacity for medical care and education. We have way more capacity for transportation, especially when we factor in building new and better mass transit. We have way more housing, way more of everything that people need in their daily life than there are people. It could satisfy people many times over. Food alone, 40% of it is wasted, and a lot of that waste comes from farmers not being able to get the right price at the right time or enough harvesters at the right time, and food is left rotting on the vine or is dumped out because it would cost more to transport it and distribute it than um, than they would be getting back for their price. Or for where the prices are at for that particular crop. So a lot of it's wasted before it even gets to a supermarket. That only is the case. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Salt and pepper. We throw away a third of food, and there's 1 in 9 people starving. So we could distribute all that food if we so choose. We can make the political decision to set aside funds to make distribution networks to come and take all of that food when it is otherwise going to be thrown out. We could, I mean, at the supermarket end, we could have systems in place to take food before it comes to its sell by date when a lot more of it is wasted as well. Yeah, instead of people having to do dumpster diving, there could be an actual system in place to with refrigerated trucks to take the refrigerated stuff or freezer trucks for the frozen stuff. And we could take that to distribution sites and just give it to people. And we could do the same with at the farm level. All it just takes is the right political will and a little bit of investment. And we could save tons of money in the long run uh, and tons of food. So that's just one of the areas of need in people's lives. Be done with all the stuff, all the things. We could have government housing built. We could just have people pool their resources and their knowledge and build houses as well. Mutual aid housing, that could be a thing. Um, it is more a matter of political will and political priorities than it is a matter of feasibility in a material sense. Um, Meanwhile, water futures are now on the stock market. Jeez. Yep, they've been trying to commodify water for quite some time, and in some cases they have. There's been cities in the U.S. that have privatized their water supply. Absolutely horrible. Um, Talk about being able to have people over a barrel if they don't want to pay your water price. I'm sure there are some sort of price controls as there are with other legal monopolies, but jeez, it seems like a very dangerous situation to be in to me, to have a for-profit municipal water system. Uh, yeah. All right, let's continue on.
And free as the air is for all. The feelings of human sympathy, of justice and right, would have a chance to develop, to be satisfied, to broaden and grow. Even today, the sense of justice and fair play is alive in the heart of man, in spite of centuries of repression and perversion.
Okay, another question. The Burn Tower says, "Isn't anarcho-communism an oxymoron? How do you have a centralized system not be centralized?" Um, okay, so communism is not only conceived of as a completely centralized system. Um, this comes from the time of Peter Kropotkin, and this book itself was written 100 years ago. Uh, the idea of anarcho-communism is everyone working together in order to satisfy all the needs that we have, but not necessarily through a centralized structure. It would be more of a local structure or an informal structure of mutual aid, would not necessarily be through an official government centralized force. So it's definitely not an oxymoron. Um, and in fact, all of leftism, whether it be just basic socialism, communism, anarchism, what have you, all are oriented towards giving people as much control as possible in their own lives and providing basic necessities for people so that they can live and make choices. So, yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. But in fact, I'll give you a definition too that might help. You can even just do the Wikipedia one is probably good enough. So anarcho-communism, also known as anarchist communism or colloquially ANCOM, is a political philosophy and anarchist school of thought which advocates for the abolition of the state, capitalism, wage labor, social hierarchies, and private property. It retains respect for personal property along with collectively owned items, goods, and services. It supports common ownership of the means of production, just not through a state. That's the main difference. It's not controlling the means of production through, you know, electing representatives that then manage the means of production for you. It is direct democracy as well as horizontal networks of worker councils with production and consumption based on the guiding principle from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. So communism also comes from being very heavily influenced by uh, the thinking of Marx and Engels and other communists as well. So, forms of anarcho communism, such as insurrectionary anarchism, are strongly influenced by egoism and radical individualism, believing anarcho communism to be the best social system for realizing of individual freedom. Most anarcho communists view anarcho communism as a way of reconciling the opposition between the individual and society. So again, it's a balance of both. We're orienting ourselves in a very communal way, like benefiting the community as a whole. It's not just about personal freedom or individual freedom. It's about together working together to create as much freedom for as much people, basically. So that's where the communist part comes into it. Let's see. So there's the you can do, you know, Wikipedia is good enough for this subject. Let's see. Mm-mm. So Salt and Pepper had said anarcho-communism is believed to be true communism. Communism, in its basic ideal, is a stateless, moneyless, classless society. So right, and that's another part of it as well. The you know Marxist-Leninist version of communism believes that you need to go through a system of socialism first, where you have a dictatorship of the proletariat, and then through people getting their basic needs met, and through setting up these systems of mutual aid, basically, eventually there'll be no more need for the state. It will kind of wither away, and you'll be left with a classless, stateless, moneyless society. Um, yeah. So the Burning Tower says, but there has to be a structure that restricts capitalism from resurging. Well, anarcho-communists believe that just through freeing enough people, through fulfilling the um, promises of the revolution, that n- no one's going to stand for any sort of upstart coming in and trying to take power again. People will just spontaneously take up arms against any threat, right? Um, it's just that it wouldn't be done in a centralized sort of way. It would be there's I mean there's many ways you can configure it. You can configure it as a federation of militias. That was kind of what they did uh, in Spain when they were fighting off the fascists there. There was a confederation of communists, socialists, and anarcho-syndicalists who coordinated together their military efforts, but like each unit was its own thing and run in its own way. They would just coordinate their efforts together. Um, so Empathy Lady says there is, in a nonprofit way, second harvest at the food shelf I work at. Refrigerated trucks being lots of almost gone by food. Unfortunately, we have to check the dates because grocery chains donate food that is past the sell by date, which we are not allowed to put out. Which is ridiculous, by the way. The sell by date is not the same as the expiration date. It's not meant to be the same, but it's often treated the same way. But there's no legal reason why you should ever use anything, sooner than the use by date or the expiration date on food, because it is still safe up until that point. It just may not be at its peak of freshness. And when you're talking about feeding people on a very basic level, being at the peak of freshness should not be the number one priority. It should be, is it edible and nutritious? And is it going to sicken them? And if we can say it is edible, it is nutritious, and it won't sicken them, I think it should be okay to distribute to those people. Um, but I'm sure the big stores get to write it off. Yes, that is true. A lot of stores that donate do write it off as a charitable donation. Nonetheless, don't discount people's efforts in organizing, like Second Harvest, to do the right thing. Yeah, and there's no reason you couldn't have just informal networks of mutual aid that work the same sort of way, just getting people food that they need. So, Salt and Pepper says anarchism is based on voluntary participation, but why would people go back to having the middlemen of money if they can get what they need and want directly, if shown it works? And I think that's a great vision. And I would say that if we can start building in that way now, and get people used to the idea of like a basically a gift economy of a network of mutual aid where people just provide basics to each other, then sure, maybe we could go straight to the point where we don't need money or central distribution or anything like that afterward. But that would take a lot of effort. I think we're probably we're probably better. It'd be better to shoot for keeping on some sort of market, but doing as much as we can through mutual aid and giving, um, because it's really, really, really difficult for people to conceive of a world without money, conceive of a distribution system without money, even leftists. very, very difficult. So it would take a tremendous amount of education and practice to get to that point where if capitalism is swept aside or if it fails or whatever, that we could just get to a stateless, moneyless society directly. I think it's I don't think it's very likely. So while I may be oriented more towards anarcho-communism, um, or just anarchism in general, I think it is more realistic to still have some structure left over, as you're saying, the burn tower, have some structure, but build it from the bottom up, um, and do it well we can under capitalism, so that people then have that tradition and that practice of living in the system they want, or as close to the system they want. But that we're probably still going to have to deal with markets for quite some time. Okay. So then the Burn Tower says this. So then this is absolutely depends on everyone agreeing on the system. Right. And we have time now to get people on board with the system or a system like it or a stepping stone. We could be shooting for anarchism, but it could be more realistic to go through a period of uh, market socialism first. I don't think that's an unreasonable way to proceed, but still try and get as many people on board with anarchism uh, at the same time. Um, so you say if anyone wants to go their own way, it breaks, or otherwise the person must be restricted. Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of how any system goes, though. If people cannot get along with the system at all, or refuse to get along with the system at all, then they do have to be managed one way or another, and whether it's just through shunning them, saying, "Hey, you're being stupid and uh, purposely not getting along with anyone. You're taking advantage of everybody. So we'd like you to change or leave." Whether that's a more formalized governmental system where there are rules in place where if you just cannot get along, here's what happens with you. That does have to happen in any system, though. So, so yeah. So who would defend a capitalist property for them if under anarchism it can meet that soldier's needs and wants? But they have to be convinced that that's the truth. That um, propaganda is a hell of a drug, and since all of us have been socialized, I'm assuming all of us here have been socialized under capitalism. It it's not inconceivable that a private army from a former business owner, or talking post the collapse of the capitalist system, um, it's not conceivable that the members of that private army would, or it's not inconceivable that they would assume that things might go back to the way they were, and that is just inevitable. This is just you know an in between period, but things are going to go back to how they were, or they might be convinced, or promised things. There's ways to manipulate people. Say, oh, well, you're going to get a privileged position in my new company if you help me overthrow these dreamy upstarts think that they can get along without business owners and stuff like that. So people have to be convinced that yes, that anarchism will meet their needs. And I come back to the idea of prefiguring all of this well we can as the best shot at actually convincing people, because it will be a semblance of a working system, even if it still uses capitalism and the current system as a scaffolding to build upon for the time being. Um, and even if it cannot operate completely outside of capitalism yet, it's still a halfway working model of the sort of future that we want to all have. So in that case, I think that's going to go the furthest in convincing people that yes, anarchism can support people's needs. It's funny how Stream Elements uh, censors words. I have a bunch of words that are automated, and uh, one of them shows up in other words sometimes. So that's why you get the partial censorship of completely innocent words. So I think you were probably saying simply. Uh, Also, the culture must be one where everyone is simply content in not wishing to have more. Well, I mean, there's I don't think there's any anarchist system where people are saying everyone is going to be at the exact same level no matter what, no matter how hard they work, they'll never have more, and uh, everyone is just going to be having everything distributed absolutely evenly. So there's that. There's going to be some natural variation, even if you have control over your own workplace, for example, assuming we still have some sort of system of compensation. There's nothing that says that you can't reward certain positions more than others, however that looks. Even if it was not monetarily, if it was you get extra fruit juice shares at the cafeteria, if you're a manager, something like that. The more important part is to make sure that no one falls past the point where they're not meeting their basic needs. Everyone should have that stable platform. So while we certainly don't want people to rise high enough to the point where they can start manipulating the system in their own advantage, like buying off politicians and you know having control over a major resource all to themselves that they can then lord it over everyone else with and extract concessions from. We certainly don't want people to get to the point um, to that height where they can start doing that and manipulating things in their own favor. And we don't want people to ever be able to fall so low that they have to worry about food security or shelter security or any of these sorts of things, unless they really, really just want to be homeless and or houseless, home free. There's different ways of putting it. They really are by choice not having a home and rambling around as they so please and doing what they feel like. But except for that extreme case or that extremely rare case, everyone is at least provided the basic needs. So that would be like the sandwich, uh, which you can never go higher or lower than, right? And I can see that it would feel like this is so you say this is it feels like this all needs a very strong restrictive ideology that is nearly uniform to ensure everyone thinks that same way. Uh, I think just exposing people to ideas more than anything is going to make the change that we need, or at least get us most of the way there. The indoctrination under capitalism is so complete that I mean we've been talking about it through this whole chapter that people even don't even associate anarchism with what it actually is. They think it's just no rules and just everyone doing what they feel like no matter what. And it's not. So just exposing people to ideas is goes a long way. Yeah, there might be systems in place of money that would serve the same purpose that would crop up. Um, but at least we could, as you know, a society, work out those problems together. It wouldn't just all be to one group of elites or another to solve all the problems. We would do it together. So if we can build a tradition of trying to solve problems together, um, then yeah, even if these systems of control and dominance cropped back up, um, we would have tools to actually address them. So, Salt and Pepper, you ask how capitalism would work in a moneyless society. I don't think I'm getting the feeling. I think the Burn Tower has been in this chat before. I'm guessing you go more towards a centralized communist system, not a capitalist one, if I'm not mistaken. So you have very low trust in people. I mean, that statement never makes sense to me. You say most numbers don't care about anything as long as they have their iPhones, sports ball, and fast food. Yeah, for one thing, I don't think that's really true. It might be true for young people that have more support and have not really lived out on their own much or anything. But in general, I don't think that's true. That as long as they're pacified, they don't care about anything. I think people, by and large, want to contribute to the world, want to contribute to life. Um, oh, you're Catholic monarchist. Well, I was completely mistaken. Uh, without without an without an economic theory? Oh no. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. A Catholic monarchist. Yikes. So you just want to go way back, way, way back to ultra centralized control. That sounds horrible to me. I don't want to live under a Catholic theocracy monarchist system. That sounds really terrible, and like people would not have much freedom at all. It kind of sounds like the Dark Ages to me, because that's pretty much what it was. Um, I don't like that system one bit. People never having any control over their lives, just everything being left up to the lottery of birth, to determine where you end up and how much agency you actually have. Um, and then you add on top of that control of the church. It's not all that different than what's being proposed here. It's the polar opposite of what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is people working together as communities to help meet each other's needs, not to have some central authority from on high dispensing laws and justice and saying how things should be, and having swift and violent retribution if people don't fall in line. That's not at all what we're talking about. We're talking uh, about as far from the opposite of that as you can be. And the only thing that would be a system of more absolute control would be a slave state. So, yeah, I don't see how you see any similarities between the two. Ooh, okay. I was not expecting that, but we do need to finish this chapter. I was hoping to get into the next chapter, but that's not to be. We got 8 minutes to go and 15 minutes before I need to be done. So we need to get moving. I do enjoy the conversation, though. I appreciate you all participating.
It has not been exterminated. It cannot be exterminated because it is inborn, innate in man, an instinct as strong as that of self-preservation, and just as vital to our happiness. For not all the misery we have in the world today comes from the lack of material welfare. Man can better stand starvation than the consciousness of injustice. The consciousness that you were treated unjustly will rouse you to protest and rebellion just as quickly as hunger, perhaps quicker. Hunger may be an immediate cause of every rebellion or uprising, but beneath it is the slumbering antagonism and hatred of the masses against those at whose hands they are suffering injustice and wrong. The truth is that right and justice play a far more important role in our lives than most people are aware of. Those who would deny this know as little of human nature as of history. In everyday life, you constantly see people grow indignant at what they consider to be an injustice. That isn't right, is the instinctive protest of a man when he feels wrong done. Of course, everyone's conception of right and wrong depends on his traditions, environment, and bringing up. But whatever his conception, his natural impulse is to resent what he thinks is wrong and unjust. Historically, the same holds true. More rebellions and wars have been fought for ideas of right and wrong than because of material reasons. Marxists may object that our views of right and
I I disagree with that. I'm sorry. That's an overly idealistic view of the cause of wars. Wars are almost always fought about are always almost always fights over resources of one type or another. You can look at what's going on in Ukraine right now. That's absolutely over resources and power and control. Almost no ideology factors into it whatsoever. It may be the pretense for war. Oh, we're going into Ukraine to root out the Nazis, or oh, we are resisting Putin because of he's an imperialist. Um, but really, it's about. I mean, in both cases, it's about resources. I mean, at least in the Ukraine's in Ukraine's uh, circumstance, it also is about preserving the power that you have, and also for the people themselves about preserving their lives. But it's yeah, wars are almost always about resources. Pretty much always about resources. I mean, the U.S. did not even get into World War II for fear of um, bankrupting itself again. We were just getting out of the Great Depression. We didn't get in until we were threatened politically by the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But so the idea that somehow we would have just gotten into World War II to fight Nazis is kind of nonsense. We would have stayed out of it as long as we possibly could have, and we did as long as we possibly could have. As did the USSR, because they too feared their fragile existence being threatened by getting into World War II, and they finally got into it because the breaking of the Warsaw Pact. Um, so sorry, Alexander Berkman, I do not agree with you at all.
Wrong are themselves formed by economic conditions, but that in no way alters the fact that our sense of justice and right has at all times inspired people to heroism and self-sacrifice on behalf of ideals. The Christs and Buddhas of all ages were not prompted by material considerations, but by their devotion to justice and right. The pioneers in every human endeavor have suffered calamity, persecution, even death, not for motives of personal aggrandizement, but because of their faith in justice and their cause. The John Husses, the Luthers, Brunos, Savonarolas, Galileos, and numerous other religious and social idealists fought and died championing the cause of right as they saw it. Similarly, in the paths of science, philosophy, art, poetry.
I guess I see a little bit more what he was getting at there when he says that wars can be fought for ideological reasons. And yeah, to a certain extent, liberatory movements, like from the bottom, people trying to liberate themselves, like the Haitian slave uprising, um, or any group that has found themselves on the wrong end of imperialism. Sure, those can be fought for ideological reasons, but that have less to do with resources. But also, it is about resources. It's about having the resources to maintain your lives. It's a little bit different framing. Um, so yeah, there definitely is more ideology that goes into revolts from below, and even working class movements from below. But overall, it is about resources, because when it comes to the point of a revolt or a strike or political action of any kind, it's about people being pushed so far that they don't feel that they have a future. Basically, they're pushed to the point where they um, don't see how it's going to get any better for them, and that they will ever do anything but struggle endlessly in misery. So, yeah, in that case, there is more ideology involved, just not. It's never purely ideological.
Poetry and education Men from the time of Socrates to modern days have devoted their lives to the service of truth and justice. In the field of political and social advancement, beginning with Moses and Spartacus, the noblest of humanity have consecrated themselves to ideals of liberty and equality. Nor is this compelling power of idealism limited to exceptional individuals. The masses have always been inspired by it. The American War for Independence, for instance, began with popular resentment in the colonies against injustice of taxation without representation.
No, come on, man. You should know better than that. Being an American who was much closer to the revolution than we are, that's for sure. That was the pretext for the American Revolution, but really that was about not wanting to have the king have power over the lives of business people in America. It was a capitalist revolution for the benefit of you know land owning and business owning men in the country. Uh, they slapped on that ideological varnish of no taxation without representation, but then they turned around and kept slavery, which is, I mean, I guess you can't really say it's taxation, but it's just taking everything from somebody and not giving representation. And they only allowed white landowning men to vote, so it was taxation without representation for everybody else. So, yeah, 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 he definitely was not the only one to get the American Revolution wrong. I think Marx had an overly rosy interpretation of it as well.
The Crusades continued for 200 years in an effort to secure the Holy Land for Christians.
Again, that was just about controlling land and controlling people, so that definitely was not a good thing either.
This religious ideal inspired 6 millions of men, even armies of children, to face untold hardships, pestilence, and death in the name of right and justice. Even the late World War, capitalistic as it was in cause and result, was fought by millions of men in the fond belief that it was being waged for a just cause, for democracy and termination of all wars. So all through its history, past and modern, the sense of right and justice has inspired man, individually and collectively, to deeds of self-sacrifice and devotion, and raised him far above the mean drabness of his everyday existence. It is tragic, of course, that this idealism expressed itself in ideas and acts of persecution and violence and slaughter. It was the viciousness and self-seeking king, priest, and master, ignorance and fanaticism which determined these forms. But the spirit that filled them was the spirit of right and justice. All past existence proves that this spirit is ever alive, and that it is a powerful and dominant factor in the whole scale of human life. The conditions of our present-day existence weaken and vitiate this noblest trait of man, pervert its manifestation, and turn it into channels of intolerance, persecution, hatred, and strife. But once man is freed from the corrupting influences of material interests, lifted out of ignorance and class antagonism, his innate spirit of right and justice would find new forms of expression, forms that would tend towards greater brotherhood and goodwill, towards individual peace and social harmony. Only under anarchy could this spirit come into full development. Liberated from the degrading and brutalizing struggle for our daily bread, all sharing in labor and well-being, the best qualities of man's heart and mind would have the opportunity for growth and beneficial application. Man would indeed become the noble work of nature that he has until now visioned himself only in his dreams. It is for these reasons that anarchy is the ideal not only of some particular element or class, but of all humanity, because it would benefit, in the largest sense, all of us. For anarchism is the formulation of a universal and perennial desire of mankind. Every man and woman, therefore, should be vitally interested in helping to bring anarchy about. They would surely do so if they but understood the beauty and justice of such a new life. Every human being who is not devoid of feeling and common sense is inclined towards anarchism. Everyone who suffers from wrong and injustice, from evil, corruption, and filth in our present day life is instinctively sympathetic to anarchy. Everyone whose heart is not dead to kindness, compassion, and fellow sympathy must be interested in furthering it. Everyone who has to endure poverty, misery, tyranny, and oppression should welcome the coming of anarchy. Every liberty and justice-loving man and woman should help realize it. And first and foremost, and most vitally, of all the subjected and submerged of the world, must be interested in it. Those who build palaces and live in slums, who set the table of life but are not permitted to partake of its repast, who create the wealth of the world and are disinherited, who fill life with joy and sunshine and themselves remain scorned in the depths of darkness. The Samson of life, shorn of his strength by the hand of fear and ignorance, the helpless giant of labor, the proletariat of brain and brawn, the industrial and agrarian masses, these should most gladly embrace anarchy. It is to them that anarchism makes its strongest appeal. It is they who first and foremost must work for the new day that is to give them back their inheritance and bring liberty and well-being, joy and sunshine to the whole of mankind. A splendid thing, you remark, but will it work, and how shall we attain it?
This has been a production of Audible Anarchist. You can find more Audible Anarchist on YouTube.
All right. That's all the time we're going to have tonight. I just wanted to address one more comment by the Brain Tower here. So they say, I believe hierarchy is okay. Personally, speaking for myself now, I think that some hierarchy, man, I wish that word was easier to say. Some hierarchy is inevitable. You're going to have hierarchy in terms of like expertise. So deciding who does what job, expertise and ability are going to come into play. That doesn't mean that hierarchy has to be top to bottom in any organization, and arbitrary either. Anarchists like to say that there should be no unjust hierarchies. So, of course, children who don't have the experience or the mental capacity yet to manage their own lives should have parents to make decisions for them. Um, and likewise, when there's when there are questions of things like expertise, as long as you can justify why there needs to be some people giving direction to others, that's usually going to be okay. But still, everyone can have more say than they do now. So take the example of, say, a nuclear power plant where you have a lot of very highly specialized positions, and you need to have people that are competent in those positions. Otherwise, a lot of people could die. Um, you want to have the people with the right expertise in positions of safety and just the daily operation of the power plant. But when it comes to things like compensation, benefits, scheduling, workplace standards, these sorts of questions can be dealt with by everybody. That doesn't take specialized hierarchies to um, get through these ideas, so they can be managed democratically. There's no justification for someone saying, I should be able to make all the decisions for everyone else, even if they have extra expertise in a particular part of the operation. So in those cases, because there is no justified hierarchy, or in those aspects of the work, when there is no justified hierarchy, man, I wish I didn't have to say that word so much. Um, it's better to have a more democratic system. Now, you say someone is going to rule over you anyway, even if it's a local council. Well, if you're part of that local council, then no, you are just one of many government actors. And the idea of anarchy is to have as close to a direct democracy in as many cases as possible. So you take the smallest unit of government possible, and you try to at least allow people to all have a say in the running of that unit, whether that's a district or a neighborhood or a small town or something like that. There's plenty of times where you can have, um, hi, there's plenty of times where you can have people have a direct say in the way things are run and the way things are distributed. The same is true of a business up to a certain size. You can have all employees make decisions on the sort of things that I was just talking about. Uh, so then you say you might as well have less people at the top so that blame cannot be distributed. Why is it better to have blame concentrated? If you have less people at the top, that's a greater chance that at least a few of those people are going to be completely incompetent or uninterested in doing their job well because they have a nice, high, cushy position and there's not much that anyone below them can do. If that power is instead distributed, then for one thing, people that are seeking power are less drawn to a position of power because there just aren't as many positions of power. And the few positions of power that there are spread out so much that you can never take total control yourself, so that you couldn't have one person take over an entire council, for example, because so many more people would have a vote on whatever the given matter is. Um, so I don't see the benefit of having fewer people at top because you'd have to assume too, for it to be a good system, that those people at the top just happen to be the best at doing that job, and that's almost never the case. You know, talent, ability, interest, things that go into being effective in a leadership position are pretty well distributed throughout the population. They don't just happen to be bred that's not part of people's genetic code generation after generation, that some are just bred to be natural leaders and conquerors of others. That's just not how it works. There's plenty of people that could lead just as well in any system. So why only hand it over to the few? That's putting all your eggs in one basket for one thing, or in very few baskets. So if they just, you know, if they tend to be a despotic person who is a complete psychopath and doesn't care about murder or doesn't care about the well-being of their people, just lets everything go to hell, well, then we're all going to crumble and be destroyed along with them. There's huge opportunities for catastrophic and calamitous failure in a system that puts all the power into one or just a few people. Just think of like a corporation. If you have a CEO who's vested with an enormous amount of power, perhaps the power over thousands of people's lives, if they just suck at their job and they only got there because, you know, they knew the right people, they could bring down entire large corporations that are now too big to fail along with them just because they're incompetent. If instead that the people all had more control, say if they could even elect who their CEO was in that given company, there'd be a lot less chance of failure. And also, if they could recall their CEO at any time, if they thought that the business was going in a bad direction, they could just withdraw their consent to be led by them. You're you have more outs to avoid calamity in that sort of a situation. The entire fortune of that company doesn't rise or fall with the competence of one or a handful of people's decisions and abilities. Uh, it makes no sense to concentrate all the power at the top to me, because then also that becomes very tempting for someone that wants power for power's sake to try and get into that position, because they can use it to, for their own self-aggrandizement and their own enrichment. They can plunder the entire company at the long-term expense of everybody and not care about it. Um, those sorts of personalities, I don't want to be able to get into positions where they can make decisions that are life or death for hundreds or thousands of people. That doesn't make any sense at all to me. Let's get back to that comment there, because that just struck me. I don't see why it's yeah, you say the blame can't be distributed. Why accountability is more direct? Well, so I mean, that's not accountability. Just saying our king or our CEO is terrible and they're doing a bad job and they should feel bad for it. Is that really accountability if you can't do anything about it? I would say that's the opposite of accountability. You might be able to more easily see the source of corruption or bad decision making. But if you can't do anything about it, so who cares? What good does that do you? Especially if you can't leave the system. In a system of monarchism, you are not free at all. You cannot leave that system. You probably can't even stop doing the trade that you were born into in most cases. I don't see any positives to this sort of a system. So you say, well, everyone should just be Catholic. I don't. Okay, just like everyone should be socialist. But the difference is, if everyone is socialist, that's not controlling the personal beliefs of anybody else. You could believe all sorts of things and be a socialist. Um, I don't see. I'm not making the connection there. So you're saying if everyone just believed what we believe, then everything would be okay. Not everyone has to believe exactly what we have to believe. We just have to agree enough about some basic things. And I think there's a much better chance to get a large majority of people to agree that, you know, everyone deserves to have their basic needs met. Everyone deserves to have as much freedom, democracy, choice, and agency in their lives as possible, balancing it with everyone else's ability to do the same. I don't think that's as difficult of a feat to get the majority on board with that as it would be getting the majority on board with a religious faith of any type. So you say you see decades of voting and voting local and national mass bureaucracy. I don't see how a socialist system would end up with a better voting outcomes. Well, not all socialist systems uh, have to do with what you mean voting people into office, or you mean voting for particular issues? I don't know exactly where you're coming from with that one. So a socialist system that is providing for everyone's needs would right away be a better outcome. Ones that are democratic. Okay. Um, okay. Okay. So I don't know. I'm struggling to understand what you're getting at here. From the angle of not trusting people to vote for what's best for them. Okay. Why would people not vote in their best interests? I mean, in the current system, people often don't vote for the best interest because of huge funded systems of uh, capitalist propaganda that gets people to believe things that are in contradiction to their best interests in order to benefit the capitalists. But if we're taking capitalist influence out of the system, and we're not having, you know, huge, massively funded campaigns anymore. I don't know. I'm not. I'm not seeing where that's going to be a problem anymore. I think most people want to have freedom and choice and democracy in their personal and political and economic lives. Um, I think that is in everyone's best interest, and I think that if most people were to think about it enough, they would agree. um, right? So they can be short-sighted and might want their immediate needs met to the detriment of future stability, overconsumption, for example. Yeah, I mean, even if that's true, how does that solve by less people having control over decision making? If you have more people having control over decision making, you have a better chance that uh, good ideas are going to get through, right? Because it's not all being gate kept by people that have a pretty big vested interest in not allowing more control over decision making processes. So just looking at, let's say, the local level, if everyone is part of the government, whatever you want to imagine that government structure to be, just say like it's a local council of some kind. If everyone is a part of that and everyone has a say over that, and that uh, the purpose of the council existing is to help people meet their basic needs. Um, I don't know. I don't see how they're going to be. I don't know. I don't know. I'm having some trouble making the connection. Why that wouldn't be better to have more people have control over their daily lives, and why we would instead think that we would get better outcomes with less people having control over a lot of people's daily lives. Almost done. Sorry. Yeah, we've gone over though. So everyone has a say, but that's only true for the majority, minority. So, but right now, what you want is to have an even smaller minority controlling everything. So you want extreme minority rule is what you want instead, and that somehow solves these problems.
No.
Again, I just don't see how. If you don't have trust in people, then you should have a system where as many people are sharing trusted positions as possible, or as many people are sharing power positions as possible, because that gives you a better that gives better odds that enough uh, good, trustworthy people are going to make decisions together um, to affect a good outcome for everybody. So you see what I'm saying? So yeah, you're doing a version of tyranny by majority, but the opposite then is tyranny by minority, and a minority that already has a lot of power and a lot of reason to do whatever they can to maintain that power, and that it also is very susceptible then to corruption. Imagine, say, like a vote buying scheme. You know, if you only have to buy the votes of a handful of elected representatives, um, then you can concentrate your efforts pretty easily. If you instead have to buy every single person's vote in order to affect a change, that's a lot more. You might end up spending a lot more on doing that. And what if they don't vote the way you want, even though you've paid them? If it's just a few people, well, then you know exactly who to look for. But if it's a lot of people, it's it's you see what I'm saying? When power is not concentrated, there are a lot more levers you have to press in order to affect a change. If you are trying to affect a change that is only good for yourself or your own uh, well-being. If there are just a few levers of power, well, then you only have to influence a few levers of power, and you don't have to even think about all the powerless people. Um, anyway, so you say, thank you for your consideration and responses. It helps me see the flaws and reconsider and research more. Well, that's great. And that's a big reason why I do this stuff. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you're welcome anytime. You've been very respectful and I guess good faith, to use a debate term. Um, but sure, yeah, welcome back anytime. Happy to have you. All right, thank you everybody for joining in. Oh, looks like we've dwindled in our numbers here, so we're not gonna rate anyone in specific. We'll just shout somebody out. Um, yeah, Lost Sue. Probably gonna be there. Yeah, I mean, I can shout out as many people as I want, I suppose, but definitely check out Lost Sue. They are talking about truth and reconciliation. Very important, uh, very important concepts. All right. Hope to see y'all next time. Let's go check out Lost too. We won't do a raid tonight. Um, and then if you're on Facebook, please come and check out. I'm pulling it up right now. Left Signal Boost TV, where myself and three other streaming channels all put out content, and we're trying hard to build our streaming collective even more. Yeah, it's a good place to find all sorts of ideas and all sorts of live streams. We stream every day. Like that. In fact, well, you know what? I forgot to check, but I bet for We Are Many. You know what? We are going to raid after all. We're going to raid for We Are Many, who is also a member of the Left Signal Boost TV streaming collective. So go check them out. Yeah, that's fine. I understand people. Facebook is very much a cesspool, but we are trying to carve out a really nice little part of it. We're doing our best to push back against all the nastiness and just terribleness of of it. All right. We're gonna raid for We Are Many. Thank you all, and see you Friday morning. More SJ Witcher, more video games and politics.